Okay, so pretty much everybody is here today, so that's great. And what we can do is during the kind of presentation part of this, if you do have questions that come up, Dagan will be looking and monitoring and can sort of interject with me so that I can respond to the questions. And if you need more clarity on something, just pop that in the chat and let me know, and Dagan will let me know then. So here we are, community-based research and ethics. Just looking, oh, sorry, one sec. So what are we doing today? I'm going to give you the big picture of what is ethics and what's the kind of framework that researchers work under in Canada, and what's really required in terms of community-based research and what we need to think about. I'll give a little bit closer, like our picture. What's the process? What are these forms? Like, what is that all about? What do you do when you're doing research connected through a university or an affiliated organization? And then, the research team, what people's responsibilities are. And then I'm going to look a little bit at a case study and give you a chance to kind of think about this and some questions or some things you can think through as we think about an actual case. So this is a case study of something I didn't work on myself. It's just a project that's come across my desk a few times in terms of as a teacher and looking at some kind of developments in newcomer concerns in the inner city in Winnipeg. So we'll go over that, and to participate in that part, you'll be going into a breakout room, and you'll have about probably 6 or 7 people in your breakout room, and you would be connecting with menti.com. So we'll give you some instructions for how to do that. And yeah, so somebody in your group needs a cell phone, so we'll make sure that happens and that we can figure that out. So so I'll get started big picture-ish. There's a lot of things you may have heard, and little names like SHRC or NSERC, and people aren't always explaining what these things are and how they relate to ethics, etc. So in Canada, there is an interagency advisory panel on research ethics. It was created in 2001. And the interagency involves 3 agencies. So it's CIHR, which is related to health research, SHRC, social sciences and humanities research, and NSERC is related to the natural science and engineering. So within those 3 organizations, that panel has people from each agency. And what has been done is there's a thing called the TriCouncil policy statement. So people who are working on research in Canada should be following, for the most part, TriCouncil policy. And it's easy to find online. It's had a few updates, but you'll notice that the dates aren't that long. You would think that research ethics would have been going back 50, 60 years, but as most people can tell you, that there's a lot of research that was done that really lacked ethics and was very damaging to communities. So you can see in this 2001 kind of context that there's this need to really think about how ethics is being approached and regulated in a Canadian context. So that starts about 20 years ago, and then there's been these few updates. But everybody, for the most part in Canada, especially if you're affiliated with the university, works under TriCouncil policy. So there's a great tutorial available, and anybody who's working in research on research projects that have ethics review needs to have the core tutorial. It's free. It's advisable to use a university email, because that then will connect you to the university. So if you're not connected with the university, you can still do the tutorial. At the end, it'll give you a certificate. Often an ethics board will ask you to when they're reviewing your project, we'll look at that and want to know if all the researchers and research assistants have completed the core tutorial, and those certificates would be included. An interesting thing, and I'm not exactly sure why, is there's the core, and then if you look down, it says module 9 and 10. So research involving First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples of Canada, it's very advisable to do that tutorial because there's a lot of questions that come up around that. So it's not clear to me why it's not included in the core, but I often ask people if they can have a look at that and get more familiarity. But I will make sure to, kind of go over some of those aspects as well today. So the big idea behind TriCouncil is based on respect for human dignity. And so that a lot of people look at ethics sometimes like, oh, I have to fill out these forms and oh, it's like a barrier or something like that. But because of the history of problematic research that's been done, that human dignity needs to be forefronted, and that what happens with the ethics application that anybody's looking at is, have you shown that you've really thought through all of the things that relate to maintaining human dignity for participants? So in this sense, they kind of frame it in TriCouncil on 3 pillars. So it's respect for persons, concern for their welfare, and concern for justice. So in the first part, you'll often hear about consent forms. So that process is really about making sure that people feel that they're free and not being forced to participate in something that they don't feel comfortable, and that they fully understand what the nature of the project is in a language that makes sense to them. So that's the free informed consent. It can be digital, or it could be verbal, or it could be in paper. There's lots of ways to do it, but it has to make sense for the participants involved. And again, they need a voice in it to be able to say that they can walk away at any time, that they're not going to have an adverse respect or event because being walking away from a project, and that a concern for their vulnerability is present. So in this sense, vulnerability refers to people who perhaps are incarcerated and have less ability to make their own destination for what they want to do because of constraints on them. Sometimes with young people under 16, it's often considered, because they're required to be in certain structures, that they may be a little bit more vulnerable. They may be in a classroom and being forced to participate in a research study that that they're not even aware of. So vulnerability is a big thing when we're looking at research projects. And also concern for welfare. Do you know the risks? And these are psychological, emotional, physical, that participants may be exposed to, and how is that balanced off the benefits for that person and to society at large? So this is a very careful balance, obviously, and it's done from the participant's perspective as well. How would they feel about it, not just how everybody else feels, as well as confidentiality in terms of, like is the anonymity of the participant being honored and respected and guaranteed in some way. Concern for justice is a good one, because it's really about, thinking about who's been invited or not invited. So to participate and have their voice put into research. So this is a big thing about inclusion, appropriateness, and awareness of what the project is. So justice is important. And especially obviously in the context of Indigenous peoples of Canada, and that have not experienced justice within research or within a Canadian settler colonial context. So what does that mean for thinking about how your study engages Indigenous peoples and their knowledges and perspectives? So there is a full chapter in TriCouncil policy, chapter 9, that really gets into the specifics of what researchers need to think about. So a lot of people, so when I see some of the forms that come through, say, oh, well, I'm not doing this research on reserve lands, so it's nothing that I have to think about right now. But literally, if you look through these different points, are the questions you need to ask yourself. So yeah, is the research being conducted on Indigenous land? That's one. Or is recruitment even including criteria as Aboriginal identity for even a subgroup. The third one, research that seeks input from participants regarding a community's cultural heritage artifacts. A lot of people would recognize that one that they should respond to. But the fourth one there, a lot of people don't realize. So if you're doing research in which Indigenous identity or membership in an Indigenous community is used as a variable for analysis, that's research that has to respond completely to Chapter 9. So, I'll give you an example after, but it's something that people aren't always aware of. So if you're thinking about the experience of Indigenous people, even within a larger study of, say, in studying the outcomes of educational results or something like that, you still need to really think all through Chapter 9. Yeah, so we can, and if we have more questions about that, for sure, I can discuss that more. So if you are responding to Chapter 9, if there's something with Indigenous research that you need to attend to, you need to engage community and have advice. And even TriCouncil recognizes that it really has to be specific to the community and their needs and what's going on. So it's impossible to just generalize and have one set of standards, but you can go online and there's lots of interpretations and advice as to the appropriate sort of engagement that would be suited to different studies. And you can always check with the Research Ethics Board as well as, and check in with the community or the people that you're engaging with. But in this example, so if it's research and it's focusing on a large community and it's known to include Indigenous people, regardless if even it's like a few, where if you're going to make any Indigenous specific conclusions, then would it be example, a study of student retention in high schools in Sault Ste. Marie in Ontario, and you're going to look at one of the variables as Indigenous participation or what's going on in terms of retention. So their suggestion is put together a little committee with organizations, Indigenous organizations, urban Indigenous people whose children may be affected by that study and the conclusions, and that they can do it and give advice to you in your research. So you can go through and we can always discuss that more, but it's one of the things that probably has the most questions, like how do I engage? In what ways, especially if it's not based in community. If it is based in community, it's a lot more straightforward of engaging with the people that you're working with. So the documents you need to think about including, so this is another question that comes up quite a bit. So people will say, you say, okay, well, what's your process for what is the agreement that's gone on between you and the community in terms of how you're going to conduct the research? And you have to document it so that it's clear, right? What is that agreement? But it's if the community itself doesn't do formal agreements in that way, and they have meetings and oral understandings, then you need to follow what the community does. You don't make ethics dictate to communities. But the ethics board may just ask you, okay, well, what is your agreement? What do you understand? And you would clarify in a document that we have an oral agreement. I attend meetings at these times. This is how I do it. And this is the substance as to what has been agreed to in that. So it's really the researcher that has to do the work. Shouldn't be downloading that off to the community. Other things you would need to include with your ethics as an application would be how you're going to recruit people. So examples of that, posters and emails, consent documents or formats you would have to include. So even if it's going to be an oral consent process, you as the researcher would need to document what you're going to be saying and how you're going to clarify that you have that consent. Also, the protocols. So step by step, like how are you going to do interviews or whatever it is? How are you going to, as you sit down, how are you going to ask for consent? Like what's the process for you? And how are you going to document it? How are you going to hold on to it? And then how are you going to start your interview? What are the questions you're going to be asking? You know, so you have to really do all that and submit those documents with your ethics, but also to also attach the core tutorial certificates for anybody who's on your project. Interesting update. So TriCouncil just updated in 2019. So this is really relevant for community-based research ethics. So I think you're picking up like that there's been quite a process going on with TriCouncil about how to engage more respectfully and meaningfully with Indigenous communities. And so in their recent update, 2018, they said that all communities should really, we should be working towards this with all communities that may be impacted by research. So I guess originally this is my view, I guess, in TriCouncil, is very much a sort of Western document that sees individuals as not embedded in communities. And that's been the kind of way they've gone. And now you can see they're edging towards it with this latest update that you know, that we should probably doing more of what has been done with Indigenous communities with all communities. So if there's a community of interest or a geographic community, and we could even see this within the north end of Winnipeg as a community, that that we should really be thinking about exactly how we do this kind of work that respects the community and not just sees people as disconnected from communities. So a big and important organization that's kind of leading in these conversations is also CommunityBased Research Canada, which is national nonprofit, and they have lots of resources for community-based researchers as well. But for them, they're trying to also kind of bring to the forefront the need to respect and engage community more fully than just as people, individuals who happen to be part of a community. So that you should really be able to understand the community, you should respect their processes and protocols and engage with them, but they should be right from the beginning helping to shape the research and the questions. So the relationships should be coming first in terms of being involved and understanding what the community sees as significant for them and important for what they want to do. And that you as a researcher almost like, you know, really more responsive than telling them what they should be doing or presenting a fully formed project. So in terms of community-based research, it's really is research that attempts to understand and challenge societal inequalities and problems. So it's not just any just general, oh, I was interested in this today. It's really social justice focused often about research that's responsive and understands that it's not research that's just with individuals, it's in a community context. And the type of engagements can be really interesting and different, and it all depends on, you know, what the community wants, what the researcher is doing. But the idea, sometimes it's been framed as capacity building for, you know, within community about research. But I've really appreciated some more recent documents where I've seen it being called bridging expertise. So that we're looking at that community has a certain amount of expertise about what it is their priorities are, what they do, what the real nature of their priorities are, and that the researchers who are based in universities have a certain level of expertise about how to do research. And so it's bridging these two things together rather than kind of building capacity, just sort of a more strengths-based understanding for both people involved, I think, as well. So a weird thing that's coming up that's very unusual, and it's mostly to Manitoba, is that health-based research is going to move out of being approved in universities, and it's going where they're putting together a completely separate research board for Manitoba called Rhythm well, the board's not called Rhythm, it's called CHIPER, but the organization that's being responsible for it is called Rhythm, so Research Improvements through Harmonization in Manitoba. So if you're doing any kind of health research, so as we think about the humanities, health, and insert for natural sciences, if it's in health, it's not going to be approved in the university anymore through a university level board. It will be a Manitoba board, which is meant to kind of, anybody who's done health research knows that there's like a mass of approvals that have to happen. So it's meant to shrink that, right? So that you're just going one stop. So yeah, we'll see how that develops, but you should just, kind of have it on your awareness if you're in health research that it may look different. So what do we do at University of Winnipeg? So I chair that research ethics board. And so I review all of the applications that come in just to see if in terms of risk level, and that is complete. And in terms of most projects that are minimal risk, meaning that it's like any participant in your research project would not encounter any kind of risk beyond kind of what their regular life would look like. So I kind of look at that, I determine, and if it's greater than minimal risk, the whole board reviews it. But if it's minimal risk, then that goes out to a few delegated reviewers, and that they take a look and then they give you that feedback. So before you're submitting an application, definitely, do the core tutorial. It'll give you a good sense and preparation for being ready. Students can it's always the principal investigator that submits the application. But if it's your project as a student, you are the PI, you would do it, but you'll have to make sure you have, you're naming a faculty supervisor. If you're a community-based organization, that's always a place to figure that out. Like there are approval boards that will do reviews for you. The easiest and probably the most straightforward way is to collaborate with a university researcher so that you can access the ethics board. So really usually the funding source determines what kind of ethics review you need and what kind of approvals you need. So so with us, like Community-Based Research Training Center is sponsored by Manitoba Research Alliance as part of their SHIRT grant. So that's a lot of acronyms, but if anything that goes through SHIRT has to have university review. And so that way, if you collaborate with the university researchers, you automatically get the university reviews. So yeah, so usually it's often funding that will determine what kind of review you need. And so you should probably just assume every project needs review, right? And then figure out how you're going to get it. So principal investigator submits the ethics application at University of Winnipeg. It's called Web Grants. You would need to obviously do the tutorial, need to think through all of the stuff we've been talking about in terms of what's the relationship, what have you agreed to, do a literature review, methods, risk-benefit analysis. You have all that sort of clear, and then you can proceed with looking at these application forms, and they basically mirror a lot the TriCouncil policy, right, in terms of the ethics process. And then, then I would review it if it's a UW project, if it's put through there, and then it's either expedited to reviewers or it's gets a full board review if it's more than minimum risk. So relationships, community-based research, the key, right? So a lot of times people look at ethics as a hurdle, right? So, oh, I have to get through this, and it can be kind of onerous, but it's all related to human dignity, and human dignity, I feel like it's expressed through the way we honor our relationships with the participants in the research and the communities that we're affiliated with. So all of this stuff is just meant to make sure that this is being done in the best way possible. A lot of researchers have great intentions, but have done irresponsible research, not quite realizing all the implications. The ethics process is really meant, if you look at it more in terms of support, it's like, okay, you've done your absolute best to maintain the dignity and respect for the community that you're working with and the participants, and that this is a way to get somebody's feedback. Like, do you see anything else? Like here, and there, you're being asked to be really, really clear. Okay, what are you doing? How have you thought about all of this? And then, yeah, at the you get that kind of feedback in the way. In my experience on the board, I feel like most of the board members, or all of them, and as far as I've been able to, in my experience, these last couple of years, they really just want to see the best research and like cover all the angles, make sure that everybody's is not going to have an adverse event from the research project, and it's to help you in that way. So at the heart of it is about honoring relationships and helping you think through that. So when you've got the research team, these are the kind of people. So the principal investigator is the person who is in charge of documenting all of this stuff, making the plans. So research is always better with more people. So hopefully you're not all by yourself as the PI, but the PI is responsible for everything. The co-investigators are pretty much anybody that you want to work with, but you always have to have pretty much one principal investigator. But co-investigators are people that are really involved in the research and that would think through all of these things with you. So, and then the research supporters can be co-investigators. So supporters may be people on maybe those advisory boards you put forward, organizations that are really supporting the research and are actively interested in the results to inform the work that they do. So they can all, depending on the involvement, they can also be co-investigators. But the supporters are important, especially for community-based research. That if you don't have supporters, then it's hard to document how you understand and are being responsible if you're not really involved with anybody at the community level. Research assistants are often, especially for funded projects, are great opportunities for students that are to figure out how research works and to get that experience. And in terms of the MRA, all of this, we're really like giving this funding for the CBRTC is really about helping people figure out how they're going to manage and learn how to be research assistants. And there will be opportunities from that larger MRA grant for research assistants. And collaborators are people who maybe can't be involved, but could give you good advice about how to they may have similar interests, and but they're a collaborator would probably be less involved. But when you're putting in an ethics application, you'd really have to specify all of these people as kind of part of the research team, and you want to be as clear as possible about how you're going to do this and how the members are working. So that's a lot of me talking. So I hope I kind of was trying to balance with what you may be interested in a broader picture and all that kind of thing. So what I was thinking we could do is a case study. And it's like, I don't know the researchers, this is public documents, so they may even be here, we don't know. But it's a great example of a case. And what we can do is just think about now, like, okay, we've talked about a lot of stuff, but say you've been hired as a research assistant, or you've been invited as a co-investigator on a community-based project. And the next slide, it'll have a little bit more details of the project, right? But you're asked to conduct interviews. So what we want to think about is, what are your responsibilities and what questions do you need to ask the PI before you get going on what you're going to do. So I'm not sure how familiar anybody is with menti.com, menti.com. But what we'll do is we'll go into breakout rooms. You'll have like probably about 6 people in your breakout room. And the idea would be that you introduce yourselves so that you all know each other, and that you can then discuss and then maybe pick one person who could help to make sure everybody's included. So when you respond to on the next slide, you'll see you can go on menti.com, and that everybody in your group can type stuff in, or you can have one person, it's up to you. But I'm just going to go to the next slide now that you can see it. So this is a specific research project. It's already been done, it's been documented, but we're going to sort of do an imaginative exercise where we think about, like think about you as a PI, or not as a PI, as being invited by a PI. And so what do you need to ask before you get started? And what are your ethical responsibilities? So what we will do, you'll see on menti.com, and I think Dagan's going to put the code in. So you'll go in your group, and you'll have that introduce each other, have that kind of discussion. And when you put things in, we can actually we'll all be able to see it. So everybody will be doing this within their groups. And then what we'll do is we'll get back together, and we'll talk about all of these things people are thinking about, and then have an opportunity to ask more questions as well, if that's where it needs to go, to see it. So everybody will be doing this within their groups, and then what we'll do is we'll get back together, and we'll talk about